so I don't have to share.
So Jeremy's never seen these slides, so
It's okay.
It's give me some confidence.
No, I did spot check, so
more.
you're not lying. It's okay.
Okay, so metrics with Sensu. The original title of this presentation was Simple, Malleable, Scalable, which was kind of a Sensu's like kind of tagline, which I don't even know if it still is. But then thinking about it more, I'm like, well, what I really love about Sensu is that it's kind of a DevOps tool. It's metrics for your team, right? Like, this isn't about the two ops guys in the corner like going crazy over some graphs. Like, I think this is a solution that is working well for my team, and not just kind of about ops guys, but kind of get the engineers involved and get your project manager involved, writing some cumulative workflow diagram metrics and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of the light that I like to present Sensu in. Jeremy?
Sure. So I'm Jeremy Carroll, operations engineer at Pinterest. I've been with the Sensu project for a while now. Probably when it first came out, I was looking for something different to replace Nagios, and been in the community for a little bit, working on everything. So.
And I'm do some ops stuff at Pantheon, which is kind of like Heroku for Drupal. So we run a bunch of Drupal apps, like 10,000 of them, and there's a lot of shit that can break in 10,000 Drupal apps. So a lot of shit you want to keep an eye on. So that's where I use Sensu. So before Sensu, like, Nagios has been around for a long time, and it was probably awesome at some point, hopefully. And then, like, monitoring sucked happened, so, I'm sure some of you are familiar with this kind of meme of, like, monitoring sucks, and kind of people really kind of searching high and low and, like, rethinking the monitoring problem, and, with the new tools that are at our disposal, and technologies and that kind of stuff. And so that led to kind of like DevOps spaghetti and duct tape. And this is like a ton of scripts and like good ideas and cool technologies and like little helper scripts that are like munin2 graphite.rb and like all of this stuff, right? That you're like, dude, this is a great idea, look at this new technology. And then you're like, I just need to put these two together, so I'm just gonna like write some Ruby or Python. And then we kind of end up with this whole world of stuff, little helpers and cool stuff that works pretty well. But it's kind of like the DevOps anti-pattern of when you go to like explain to one of your engineers and you're like, dude, it's so easy. You just write the metric here, and then it goes through here, and then something else is polling that, and then you have this Ruby script which is doing that polling and kind of sends the data here, and it has to go through the firewall, so this authenticates, and then it's this like big long story. And so I think Sensu solves some of those problems. Makes it kind of a little more of a cohesive space. Do you want to do this one?
Yeah. Also, in general, to add on top of that, like, the biggest barrier when I was looking at Sensu is that, configuration management started taking off a lot more than, BCFG and a bunch of other ones. So I started using Puppet. And in Nagios, the classic, pattern was store configs with a bunch of other nastiness. And especially if you go to the cloud when you have auto-scaling and a lot of things coming in and coming out, it became very painful to actually have things automatically wire up. And I wanted the least amount of touch possible to get things going. No more things to discover the resources, automatically hook up, do all the things so I don't actually have to worry about reconciling and doing all that work like I was doing with the kind of the duct tape, Nagios, Puppet setup. So the nice thing about at least Sensu, initially it's been getting better and better all the time, was that it has a lot of hooks into modern stuff, like being able to merge all the configurations in the hash map to play with configuration management, like include style packaging. Just add a file here, don't have to worry about having everything merged in one file, which Puppet at that time I had a problem with. And then in general it was a lot easier to work with reconciling what was in Sensu with what's in EC2 and clean up stuff automatically and all that type of stuff, so that I can just add something automatically, gets monitored, goes through my stuff, and the language is a lot more expressive. People write in actual code. A lot of the stuff out there is just what people reuse, like Nagios. You just pull this check from Nagios Exchange and you're done. If you want to do any type of modification, it usually becomes a little bit more painful as things are custom. So it's nice that you can just inherit, the handler class, do everything you want to do, or the plugin class, and then it's a little bit more easier to kind of do that. Custom things you want to do that were more your business metrics.
So another thing, metrics, there's monitoring, right? And people think of Nagios, they think of monitoring, and then there's metrics, which are like, there's metrics and then there's monitoring. But like, it's kind of coming out of all the people thinking about this, right? You keep thinking about it and they start to merge, right? Like, what is monitoring, what is metrics, like, should I alert off my graphs, and should I, what's kind of event streams and monitoring and metrics, and they all like start to merge. So like that distinction still is a little blurry to me, but I think Sensu makes it blurry in a kind of or combines them rather than like confuses them.
Sure. And I mean, right now, just putting up there in the roll call, there's just tons of stuff out there that, software as a service and vice versa. So, I mean, with the culture that I was at, we're more of like, wanting to kind of get some custom solutions and then kind of work with your business model that a lot of other monitoring scripts and solutions didn't kind of play with at that time. And I think, you could talk about
yeah. Like, there's a lot of awesome stuff out there, right? Like, there's a lot of great stuff for storing time series data. And displaying it and rendering it, right? OpenTSDB, excited to hear more. Librado, Cassandra, Carbon, like RRD. There's ways to look at stuff. There's NuPlot, there's D3, like there's R, right? These things are like purpose built. They're awesome. They do what they do really well. Like nobody wants to replace something that works well. What we want to do is kind of replace the parts of the system that seem like they're kind of duct tape and glue. And there's like, there's a ton of cool SaaS stuff out there, but like, and SaaS definitely has its place, but like the solution I was looking for, like the integration piece, like it's hard for it to come from SaaS because just like the community and the development and that kind of stuff. Datapants.com isn't actually a SaaS monitoring product. It is one of my top 5 favorite websites, so I think everybody should go check it out.
All right, so what do we need? This side of it. So I mean, this kind of explains a lot of the stuff. I mean, a lot of the things in Sensu, the reason why it's easy is it's just standard in, standard out. So anything you kind of handle with that, you can kind of do. That cloud-friendly nature is what kind of brought me to it in general, is the automatic discovery of resources.
Jeremy's picking the items. He knows what I'm talking about.
I know where you're going with this. You know what I mean? So, of course, open source, everything else like that, people can work on. The config management friendly stuff, I know you're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I think the people, Estonian in general, I had everything from the ground up built to work with a configuration management system, and they took a lot of feedback to make sure that it's not getting in the way of things like local variable replacement and configuration styles that actually work with Shell and Puppet and other tools.
So what else? Like modular architecture. I'm going to pick on the project Greylog 2. Does anybody know it?
Yeah.
It's a cool like log kind of. You can send logs there, and then you can kind of visualize them and have streams of logs and stuff. And it's really cool, but the UI is kind of tightly bound to the API, which is kind of tightly bound to the data store. And so, like, I still use it and I love it, but I think what I was really looking for with this problem is similar to the feelings I have about Logstash is like a solution where you're like, hey, that works, I get it. It does this thing, it does it well, like. I can like put it in one place in my architecture, and like I'm not confusing transport with UI and that kind of stuff. What else do we have here? Flexible scheduling. Like some checks you want to run every couple seconds. Some checks you want to run every couple hours or days or something. And so that's kind of another requirement. Pull and push models. Like the kind of traditional like poll every 5 minutes doesn't quite fit modern use cases, and sometimes we want to push some data in, like when we can get an action. It's an efficient way, a nice way to do it. Transport, like StatsD is cool and Graphite's cool, but often you end up just doing that over the open internet. You're like HTTPS or securing it or something. You're like, I don't know, probably no one will blast my whatever port like 8125 or whatever. So these are kind of all the these are not a firm set of requirements, but some of the things that like I think kind of make up the core set kind of requirements of what was coming out of the monitoring stocks and what we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean in general, I really like the flexibility to determine your model. I mean some things work really well polling, in general. Some things need push, like if I have an event happen, like a RAID controller go bad or things like that, I can actually push it to the server and get a heightened alert without having to wait for a pull cycle, checking for an event that may not exist all the time. So I mean, it's up to you, the type of flexibility and the type of deployment options.
Open source. So it's Sensu's MIT licensed, which is good. And there's a bunch of contributors. I think 50 is pretty good. There's over 50. There's 51, and that includes Anthony Goddard and his evil twin, Anthony Goddard. But I'm really excited about hang out in IRC, and there's a ton of people there, and I think it's a great community and it's growing. We have people who have literally never. This morning, some guy wrote Ruby code to core. Granted, it was just a .2s, but got a pull request in. I don't think he's ever written Ruby before, So and that's something I'm pretty stoked on. Sensu is really getting the community involved in making it kind of an open community and getting as many contributors, especially kind of in the plugins and handlers, the metrics collection and stuff like that. Parts which are really easy to write, and it's great if you can, if you guys try to get going on Sensu and you can already have oh look, Cassandra plugin, HA proxy plugin, blah blah blah. They're all right there. You just need to copy them over to your config management and get going on. Is anybody in the room on here? Joe Miller.
So how does it work, Nick?
So Sensu uses, let's get down to some real stuff. So Sensu uses RabbitMQ kind of as the backbone for, so one way to think about Sensu is a metrics and monitoring bus. And so Rabbit plays a good role as the bus. So kind of the heart of it. So clients can connect to arbitrary queues. So I'll get to dance around a bit. Found all these awesome icons. So you run a client, a Ruby client. There's awesome install packages, so you don't have to worry about your kind of server Ruby libraries messing with you that Joe wrote. So your app server might connect to an app queue, and your job workers might connect to one called worker. And one database might connect to a Cassandra queue, and another might connect to a MySQL queue. And so, and that kind of defines kind of what they're listening, what they're listening on in terms of metrics and monitoring. And there's kind of three obvious modes you can use Sensu. One is the request result pattern, which is pretty standard, where the Sensu server will publish on RabbitMQ a check request. So it'll pick maybe the database queue, and it will make a request, say maybe hey, check on your disk usage. So both of these Sensu clients down here, because they're listening on the DB queue, will pop that off, run the check, and then put the results back on the results queue, and that'll go through the Sensu server, and whatever needs to happen will happen. Another mode is standalone mode, which is still a kind of a polling scheduled mode, where maybe this job worker, rather than having the Sensu server kind of issue the request, it's free on its own will as a Sensu client to kind of make checks and push them back on the results queue back through the Sensu server to be handled. And then the last mode is a push mode. Jeremy mentioned works really well for certain things. And so say you have an app running here, and it, I don't know, maybe it notices something weird is going on and wants to alert you right away, or it has some really good metrics it wants to send your way. It can just push that right to the client over TCP UDP. We'll check out that a little bit later. And that'll just go right up back to the Sensu server, and it can handle it as it needs to.
Yeah, I think this is also one of the biggest points of contention in the community, is the use of a message bus system to actually do the metrics and the results. There's other type of middleware patterns that other products have used, like mCollective, if you're familiar with that one, that you can get scalability out of a system like this because of the volume based nature of it. And in general, it offers you the discovery features. You're connected to the MQ. The server knows about you because you're going to respond to those. The server will actually do a heartbeat request every once in a while to see who's still alive. So we'll publish a check to a hidden queue that says everyone who's still alive responding, so it knows dead, no detection, things of that nature. And in general, since it's the middleware has all the patterns you can expect from that, you can subscribe to multiple queues if you're doing multiple things. And for example, some of these are in the DB queue and the Cassandra queue and vice versa. And it offers you a little bit more flexibility on determining kind of this hybrid role. So if you're configuration management, you're not just kind of like the Nagios style, I'm in this host group, I'm in this service group, and I'm kind of, this is what I'm doing. You can be a member of multiple things and do your checks. And then when it tells you to do your check, it doesn't tell you how to do your job. You know, like a lot of things with Nagios, sometimes it tells you exactly the parameters and what to do. Instead, it just says a command, hey, do your check, and then whatever locally is in the configuration, it will do and publish the result. So it has a lot more mutation, those type of things. You can get a little bit more flexible and expressive.
And yeah, like, you know, nothing cares about an IP, what your host is, or anything like that. It just kind of cares about this concept of queue.
Which is nice in the cloud, because if you're spawning, I just get instance IDs and I don't care. They're ephemeral, they come up and come down. So since it's connected, it will know, hey, I've never seen this host before. Let's add this to the system and group, and there you go. I'm automatically running checks and results.
Or have you ever gotten a recycled IP in EC2 that you used to have before, and it comes back online and triggers some and stuff? Yeah, and Rabbit is kind of like like there's a lot of questions around that, so we can maybe talk about that kind of at the end. So like that's kind of how stuff gets, you know, from the server, kind of metrics get around and checks get around. But then the cool, like one of the coolest parts of Sensu was like what you do to handle like either metrics or monitoring alerts.
Yeah, so one thing that's nice is that when you get the result back, it's up to you in whatever code you want how to handle it. It's also one of the things is that when new people come to the community, the default handler, what is it, like standard out or email or something like that?
Yeah, log to disk.
Yeah, log to disk. So my thing is, however you want to handle the results, up to you. So, you get a lot of metadata coming back from that as JSON. You get, you know, what's this result code? How many times does it occur? And all the type of things you can do with it. So it's up to you to write whatever you want and how to handle those. So you can, I know there's work in the aggregation stuff to do aggregation of cluster results that's out there. And basically anything you can write in Ruby, you can do. So that's how people like send stuff via TCP to like Librado or other type of SaaS products. You know, they just handle the stuff. They get the payload as the metadata, and they can just transform it with any Ruby gem out there or wherever they want. Send it and do whatever they want.
So, you know, for monitoring, right? Like, you don't really care about throughput. If you have a bunch of alerts going, you know, if you have 10,000 alerts going off in a second, it's going to be like a bad day. So monitoring is kind of the easy case, right? And you want like high flexibility, right? Like you basically just get a Ruby script, a Python script, like any script you want, takes in a JSON blob on standard in with like a bunch of data about the check, the host, or the check, the client, kind of the history of that check for the last 20 checks and stuff like that. And your handler can do whatever it wants. So it can email, it can, you know, send occurrences data to Librado, it can send, you know, it can go to PagerDuty or OpsGenie, or it can log to disk, it can go to IRC, it can, you know, go to HipChat, it can like kind of do whatever you want. And that's where like the flexibility is awesome. Coming back to monitoring versus metrics, one of the key differentiations is throughput. Like you really shouldn't alert to PagerDuty, you know, 100 times a second. With monitoring, you're going to want, you know, thousands of metrics a second coming through there. So in that case, it's a little cut off by the screen here, but we shift kind of from high, we make the trade-off from high flexibility to more high throughput. And so that's where kind of the metrics coming back to Sensu server can go right on AMQP, can go forward directly via TCP or UDP. And so that's what kind of enables some of the kind of high workflows at scale. You know, there's no one size kind of fits all thing here, right? Because like, if you love your metrics and they're super important for you, but you only do a couple a second or something, like you could have the fattest, you know, you could have a Java handler pretty much that like spun up a jar and it's but like, and you know, scale is all relative, especially in San Francisco, right, and Silicon Valley. Like, you might feel like you have a ton of servers at 6 or like, I don't know, 60,000 or something. So, you want to talk about like scale? Kind of?
One thing that's nice though is that you don't have to centralize your metrics through the bus. So I never use that feature. I know other people have, but sometimes if you want to send all your messages through the bus to have the server inspect it, but it's just going to go to an endpoint anyways, you can have the clients themselves directly, you know, send to a TCP socket, send directly to a UDP socket. So you don't have to necessarily put everything on the bus. And that's what's kind of flexible about Sensu, at least from the client perspective, is that the checks themselves can do whatever they want. For Ruby, they can, you know, throw them out somewhere other system on the side. But the nice thing is that since you have your handler notion, there's a couple other open source projects that I liked. One written in Python called Diamond. They basically allow you to write a check once, but then mutate it and throw it wherever it wants to go. So you don't have to have the same 3 results go wherever you want. So if you wanted to try something like OpenTSDB or vice versa, and you have the same metric data, you don't have to write 3 scripts on the same host to get the same data to send to 3 different places. You know, if you want to send to Ganglia, Graphite, or anything else like that, you can have one check, get it, mutate it, and then send them, you know, to where you want. So you can reduce the overall, you know, system instead of having 10 daemons run metrics data if you're kind of experimenting and don't know which one you want to go with yet.
And so, you know, like I think this is one reason Sensu is great to me, is it's not super opinionated, and it works well, and you can kind of grow with it, and you can, you know, different people can use it for different stuff. And I think the way Jeremy and I use Sensu is very different, but we both kind of get the value and you know, are able to contribute and kind of like think about it in the same way, which is pretty cool. So I'm gonna.
I think we talked about that.
Yeah. So, but you know, yeah, kind of. It's all well. The way I use it, it's all secured with SSL. There's no kind of, you know, just write to Graphite, or, you know, the AMQP, the RabbitMQ handles the SSL stuff. Scalable as you think RabbitMQ is, since you can do it. And using the fan out exchanges for requests. One note is that Sensu is a Japanese fan, which is kind of the logo, and that kind of has to do with the fan out motif of using RabbitMQ fan out exchanges.
Sure. So one thing that's nice is that everything in Sensu is mainly JSON. So I mean, from the configuration of the clients, you know, the server configuration, it's just pretty easy to understand. There's a couple of conventions, which is nice. Is that in the actual checks themselves, this is kind of an example that Nick put together of how you want a check to happen. So when this runs, it will go to these handlers, the default handler, Graphite, Librato. It's kind of what I talked about before, is that you have the output that go to 3 different places. So on the server, if you remember the different types of topics, it will send the results of that to all 3. So if you have Ruby code on the server, they'll handle them all how they're configured. Runs at 30-second interval, but the nice thing is that it will do variable substitution. So it does have some polymorphism for the client, so that you can take advantage of local variables and local things. Like this one was the host name stuff. So if you have a host name, you know, JSON configuration variable, replace that with host name. Some of them are built in. But the nice thing is that you can write your own. So it's kind of like if you have factor or ohio or whatever have you, you can use those facts inside the templates by just basically creating them inside the configuration. So anything you can possibly think of, like if you want this notification to go to a different group, and you have, you know, an email address associated with the server or vice versa, you can then through your CM system put them in the configs to do alerting or routing, you know, based on the servers or anything else like that. And then, you know, if you want to explain some other things.
Yeah, so this is a basic check, and we're going to go through a couple, highlight a couple different parts of this. I had to really cut down this, but you can imagine this is some Ruby script you run that takes in kind of an identifier and spits out some metrics about maybe your MySQL replication lag. And we'll kind of go through it bit by bit. So cloud friendly, we kind of mentioned this before, but instead of kind of dealing with any IPs or hosts or anything, you're just saying like, hey, this check should go to everyone who thinks they're MySQL server. You know, and maybe MySQL server and Postgres server, and maybe that, you know, script is can get lag from either one of those, just via SQL or something. So this is, you know, just really nice. It's really flexible, and you know, depending on your own architecture, you can kind of have it as many subscribers, or kind of that could go to different data centers or shards or multiple types of servers.
I think it's actually kind of a simpler model. I mean, people come from Nagios, you know, you got your service groups, host groups, commands, checks, and you get into a lot of, it's not very dry sometimes. You actually get into a lot of duplication unless you use the object tricks and things like that to do inheritance inside of Nagios, which not a lot of people use. So the nice thing about this, though, is that you get a lot more flexibility. You can still do it that way. You can add custom MySQL server, data center 1, or vice versa if you want it to, but you can keep it generic and mutate the stuff. It's all up to you.
What do we have next? Oh, easy timing. Like, you know, some checks are heavier than others, and some things warrant a little closer eye. And it's just pretty nice to just put in an interval there and be like, hey, you run every 30 seconds, you run every hour, and just be done with it. It's that easy. So standalone, do you use standalone?
Not much. I mean, every once in a while.
You want
So if you want a check that is not on to be scheduled by the server, usually the interval is like 30 seconds. That means the Sensu server itself will throw a pulse on that here every 30 seconds. People will respond to it. In standalone, the client will do the schedule. So instead of waiting for the server to wait for the message to send it on there, it will just do it itself in its own internal timer on a 30-second schedule. The nice thing is that sometimes via firewall rules or some other weird things, people may not have the flexibility to have everything listened to a central bus. Or some people just don't want the server to do that type of timing. In that case, everybody can time themselves. You don't need any type of pulses, whatever coming through to send things out.
And mentioned this, but like it's as easy, like say I've got sending all my metrics to Graphite, and then I think one of the cool thing about Sensu is it allows experimentation, and this is actually verbose because in this one check it's defining its handlers, but you can also have handler sets. And in that case, in one place in my configuration management, I just add comma Librado, and all of my metrics would start being sent to Librado. It would require, making sure that Graphite and, basically that you have these different handlers that kind of know what to do with the output of this command. But it's pretty cool, and I think that's, kind of, again, like the broad landscape of monitoring and metrics. It's cool, having a tool that allows for experimentation is a good thing.
Okay.
Oh, this is just to show, like, these checks they run, and they fork, they run, and they exit 0, 1, or 2, which is reusing the Nagios kind of API for server checks. So you can literally install Nagios checks if you're coming from that background, or they're just easy to get on every server because they're in every package manager ever, and just stick them in there. You can use bin find. You can use anything that exits 0 for okay, and like 1 or 2 for not okay.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't find a lot of value rewriting 10 years of Nagios checks. So in a lot of my stuff, I just reused everything that was out there, but just in a different schedule. Yeah, I mean, my thing was interesting about this is that if you have clients, there's like a local port, almost kind of like StatsD and other type of systems that you can just push JSON to, and it will listen to it, and it'll just basically serialize that into actually a Sensu result. Basically, this is what it would throw anyways on the bus, and we'll go to exactly where it needs to go to. So if I see something that I want to handle outside of the scope of Sensu, don't want to do scheduling, don't want to do anything, I just want to run my code, Bash, Python, whatever have you, all you got to do is basically just connect to the local socket and send it this payload. So I mean, in this case, it's using netcap to just kind of just pipe this stuff straight through. But anything you can actually do there can output JSON, blob that looks like this will end up going to the server in the API. So it's kind of nice, kind of like a backdoor way to get metrics in, and you don't have to use anything else.
So I usually mostly use the push currently for when I have like 3 days without a PagerDuty alert, and I'm worried that like PagerDuty's broken or Sensu. I'll just fire off one of these with a 2, and then sit around for a few minutes and wait till my phone to ring, and then hack it.
Cool.
So gimme. So these are kind of more my wants. I'll let Jeremy go.
No, you can talk about your wants.
So we want contributors. I am really excited to get some contributors. Like I said this morning, got some guy to get his pull request into the Sensu server, that like had never written Ruby before, and I think that's awesome. Love to help anybody get involved in the community. I think it's really helpful and low-key and fun kind of, IRC channels. I'm a nerd because I think an IRC channel is fun. But, also installs, kind of any sort of blog posts if people are comparing stuff or excited when they start using it or anything like that. Hang out in Pound Sensu with us. If anybody's looking to make us a better fan, we could use a key designer that wants to give some love.
Now questions. Sure.
So the example you have with the MySQL replication check, what if you have multiple metrics that you want to export in a single check? Would you have to do a separate check over and over again for all the different things?
It all depends on how your scripts work. If you need to execute 5 scripts, then if you find some way to.
So one of the bad things about Sensu is that it's like kind of so flexible that you're like, what does this do? And that's a good tip for next time to show. So commonly a convention is to use graphite style output. So it's new line separated tuples of metric and then value and then timestamp, and so that's kind of a convention. I mean, that thing could output like anything you want, but the convention is that. And then what happens is that the handlers read that directly, and so it's also kind of the convention that handlers all kind of accept this new line separated tab separated tuples. But in that way, the standard is you could we have a Cassandra check Joe wrote. It outputs like 100 tuples.
Yeah, but that's what's kind of nice is that anything that you write, you can write the handler to deserialize that request. So I mean, if you wanted to actually have your script is do an array of JSON, JSON data back, and then you can have your handler, basically just go through it, walk through it, and do whatever you need to. So,
you could do UTF-8 like Klingon stuff. And then, break it down.
Sure.
Yeah. I see. So in the example check you had MySQL servers as the set of machines that you run that check. So I assume that's a union of that list, MySQL servers and Postgres servers and whatever. Do you have the ability to support an intersection of lists so that this check should only run on a machine that has this and this quality?
No, so I don't think that's there.
Well, but you can do that with your architecture. Like for example, the clients subscribe to something. So the clients can say this is where I'm going to go subscribe for checks. So you can say this client subscribes to MySQL servers, and then the client can also so how you break it down. So the clients can say I'm this, and vice versa. Right. So you can say that you don't have to do it that way. You can just basically do a finer grain instead of coarser grain, and have multi-memberships. You can have things be member 4, 5, 6 different checks or something.
So, like in this example, right, you can have standard database stuff, which is Stielau or something, and then you have Cassandra and MySQL, which is like read latency and replication line.
Right. I mean, like we had some like core metrics, like everything will be a member of core, and then individual application-specific metrics, and then cluster-specific metrics or weird one-offs. You can actually do that based on whatever your configuration management system can put in there. You can just basically throw it right down and subscribe to the
So commonly, if you use Chef, there's just a common way to do it. Kind of there's an awesome Chef repo which you can, hopefully just and put in your, knife upload and run, and you'll like have something good going. But what that does is a direct mapping of your roles to your queues. So in the same way that in Chef, right, you might say, hey, this is a database server and it lives in this data center and it's in Cassandra, and then that's a direct mapping. Direct mappings are always good to prevent confusion. So,
and in the Puppet way, I mean, I've done is that you just have a defined, not a parameterized class. I have one of those, but a defined to keep putting out configuration files in the directory, like comp.d style, and then you get these 5 or 6 configurations.
So that's there's kind of like a conf.d thing. So it's like, you're seeing like one recipe. I'm the Chef, but one recipe in your configuration management can drop like one config, and then another one can drop another, and you don't have to worry about like munging that. It's just like JSON that gets merged.
Right, it gets merged. Go for it. You should.
So if I want to figure out what all the asserted alerts in my system are right now, is the right way to do that to write like a deserializer, a request handler that like sticks them all in a database or something like that? And how do I see everything that's asserted?
Well, here's the cool thing is that we kind of didn't break that down on that level, but there's the API, there's the server itself, the Sensu API, the server, the client. The API actually uses a Redis backend to actually store the data itself. So the API has a lot of nice slugs that you can actually do for get checks, get results, get open, get by host, whatever is open. So you can actually use that to delete host, create host. So there's a whole API separate of the system that you can actually use to reconcile.
So we have like a Hubot plugin where you can do like Sensu checks, and it like hits the API, and then it goes like. Burr, burr, burr.
So is there a UI or just an API?
The UI was bad, but somebody redesigned it. It was actually good.
Somebody made that.
Yeah, I know. Well, no, so it was,
No, so there's 2 UIs. So it ships with one called Sensu Dashboard, which is like straight like JavaScript. There's a little Ruby Sinatra proxy to it, but that basically is just, you know, a visualization for the API in some ways, right? And then there's another kind of app called Sensu Admin, which actually has its own like database, which you can run on Heroku, which keeps track of like users, you know, so you can give creds to different people, and you can kind of write Ruby plugins or hack it to like, you know, do org specific, I don't know, escalation or, you know, kind of introspection into the state of alerts and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's nice about it is that the API is that you can use your own reconciliation. So, for example, if you terminate an instance in EC2, we can then go use the API to reconcile that, to delete that node, you know, and do things like that behind the scenes.
Right. So that's like the Sonian. It's like comes out a little bit like the strong Sonian influence. Like they're spinning up, you know, gobs of EC2 instances a day. So that's their use case that really had to make sense.
What's your experience like with dealing with like failures? I've heard like a few references about databases, so eventually those will go down. Like how does Sensu handle that?
Well, I mean, basically, it's however you want to handle it. I mean, one thing is that there's different schools of thought. You know, cluster-based metrics. You know, if you have a loosely coordinated system, looking for percentage of host down. There's some features coming actually in Sensu that you can beta test right now that will look at more aggregate type stuff. So you can say a percentage of this pool of like numbers down.
But what if like the rabbit goes down, or you
Oh,
also
yeah.
mentioned
I mean,
Redis
that's-
and like
That's
how
all
does
based
Sensu
on the middleware pattern. So I mean, I
Oh,
know they
okay.
do multi-master for the with Redis-based membership. You know, so like a leader lock election for multiple Sensu masters. RabbitMQ is up to you. Right? So
And then like we have one server or a couple server issues ping checks to other servers. So that's our kind of ping escalation. There's also Sensu does its own heartbeat. So also if Sensu just doesn't talk to a node that it was talking to for like 3 minutes, that'll also go through the Sensu server and get handled however you want.
yeah, but I mean, it's also up to you. I mean, like for example, we do multiple like double coverage out of band checks. Like either supervisor D or monitor, or some other system will monitor the monitors and restart them if it can. So I mean, it all depends on your architecture. If you're really nervous about this. But personally, I have not done high availability MQ for this. But I mean, if anything, it can support it.
In practice, is it a problem?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, I think that but I think that distributed MQs in general are hard. So most people just try not to go that way. Keep it simple, keep it scalable, keep it working. Sure. Oh. Sure.
I was just curious to know if anyone wrote a backend RTSDB to.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. That's nice. But what do you guys use typically to persist your data?
Well, I mean, in Sensu, it's actually Redis that does the persist the check data. That's the design decision. It's very simple. It's like just basically key sets, you know, check history.
Does it persist metrics data?
It doesn't persist metrics. It
So
persists
there's kind of
yeah.
two different groups too. Oh, maybe I missed that on my check.
Yeah,
A
sure.
monitor, you declare something as a monitor or a metric. Monitors are only handled if they're don't exit with 0. Metrics are always like handled, which means sent to whatever you have set up to handle.
Right. Yeah, I mean, inside the code, there's a lot of filter logic that if number of occurrences, flap detection, it goes through like all the listed filters, and then if it needs to handle it, it will. So then you don't have the same problem where you get an alert every 10 times. You can say, you know, every time it happens, you keep getting an alert. It does the whole flap detection. Only repeat every 30 checks or vice versa, all that stuff. Yeah.
So we've recently spun up Graphite and Collecti and StatsD. We're looking at using like Logstash Kibana kind of as an open source Splunk. But is there any way to leverage the alerting mechanisms of Sensu for data that goes in through StatsD into Graphite, either by like injecting it directly into Sensu or having Sensu pull out of Graphite?
I think there's a metric that I use that I think is in the community repo that, are you talking about like checking Graphite data?
Yeah, like
Yeah,
you
so
know, like
you
interrogate
just
the
do
list for files
format
in Graphite.
JSON. I'll show you how, like, so we do average request time for our API and average, you know, that's why Graphite's awesome. You can do like aggregate whatever derivative of this in this data center, load average, whatever, and if it gets over 100, like, let me know.
So,
Yeah.
so Sensu can interrogate directly to the.
Yeah, I'll go over that with you.
Yeah, I mean, like anything you can write. The thing is, I kind of figure it's kind of like a tool, almost like some other tools like Jenkins and whatever. That it's a monitoring router. It can route data from A to B points, but also general like cron scheduling framework. If you wanted to write some on the server, kind of like Nick described, pull another data source and alert off of it, sure. So I mean, it's expressive in that way. It's kind of a blessing in reverse.
Well, thank you guys.
Excellent.
We can chat more.